Here's Johnny.
Hey, y'all, Pastor Emil here with another episode of Sweet Jesus. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Ice cream is sweet, but Jesus is sweeter. Scott bailed on the ice cream, but I've been looking forward to this, so I have a Snickers ice cream bar here to enjoy while we talk Jesus. And
I had Bing cherries for.
those are sweet.
Yep, they are.
God's
Very good.
candy. So pull up something sweet. I guess oranges or cherries or whatever it is you got.
Watermelon.
Watermelon. Oh, yeah, there were watermelon season. Saw a guy with a big truck of them on Gauze the other day. Join us as we take a look at something I wasn't expecting to be talking about today. But once I started reading, holy cow. Make sure you smash something. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Publications here. Check it out. We were in Matthew 13. And actually, I do think it applies.
Good.
The
It's not so random. I threw him a curveball.
Yeah, so verse 51 of Matthew 13, have you understood all these things, Jesus says to his disciples? They say, yes. He says to them, therefore, every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old. And so there are old things, that timeless things that we can bring out. And then there are new things that need to be brought out as well. And if they understood the parables that Jesus was kind of giving them in Matthew 13, there's this idea that, well, you'll get the old stuff and the new stuff. You'll have all these different treasures. They'll all be wonderful and priceless and amazing. And then you've been asking about this other one for a while, though.
Have I?
Mark, the figs, right?
Oh, right.
You've
Have
been
I?
like,
Yeah.
said
Myself.
the figs,
Yeah.
like every now and then, like, oh, hey, what about these figs? We should look at the figs. We should look at the figs. I'm like, what is this guy with figs? You want a fig Newton? Maybe I should get you.
You do the tricky part.
1,000 different weird commercials from the fig Newtons. But I started taking a look at this, and wow, there's a lot here. And there's a commentary I was looking at to try and make sense of it all. It's a Concordia commentary by Jim Veltz. There is some by this guy, Christopher Mitchell. That's only the last however many verses, anything past chapter 16, verse 8, because Jim Veltz probably insisted that those are not part of Mark, and therefore he refused to put them in the commentary. So they got somebody else to do that part.
Yeah, okay.
He's like, that's not the Bible. I'm not going to put that in there. So
That's the part that has some says those are verses that were there, and then there's another later text that had them, and is that what those ones are? Okay.
yeah, there's nothing contradictory to the Bible, but it's kind of like they must have added this in because it seems like a lame ending.
Mm.
Because if you ended at Mark 16, verse 8, it just says something like, fear seized them and they ran away afraid, basically. Let's read it. It's only one verse.
I'm throwing you more curveballs.
Yeah, why not? Why not? And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. But in the context of Mark, which I think will apply somewhat to what we're going to talk about with Mark 11, that makes total sense, because this is kind of the one that is narrated sort of, or dictated, not informed by Peter is maybe a better way to say it. So the gospel according to Mark as told to him by Peter. So that's why you get a little more emphasis in here about, the disciples being morons, basically, and and why it says in Mark 16, go tell, my disciples, tell my brothers and Peter. So sort of this like singling out of Peter. Where is it? Very large. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you, right? So it's like one of these, I don't know, maybe a self-flagellation, so to speak, of Peter. Like, oh, yeah. And that guy Peter, who really didn't belong in the disciples anymore at this point. But it is one where they just consistently don't get it. And it would make sense that at the very end, it's like, oh, look, they still don't get it. But also, the fear was speaking, that idea at the end may very well have been intended to speak to the original audience, which this wasn't necessarily intended originally for a universal audience. It was for a specific group of people, namely Christians in Rome around the time of great persecution. I mean, some people have different ideas every now and then, but I think that's generally the accepted setting, so to speak. So, hey, these guys ran away in fear, but you know the rest of the story. So you're in fear right now. Stop it. Like, here's your chance to take it in a new direction.
So it wasn't like they had like 3 tablets and then whoops, and that last
bring you these 15. 10 commandments. Yeah, no. It wasn't a mistake. I think it was.
Or he didn't like peel it off to put his gum in or something and lost the verse.
But so you have these manuscripts that go all the way to verse 20, but then the older and older and older you get manuscripts, which archaeology is like the best friend of Christianity because we just keep finding stuff. Whereas literally every other religion, I mean, archaeology is a testimony against it. So the more they find older manuscripts, and then all of a sudden they start seeing like, wait, this stuff after verse 8 is not there. Or it's pretty obvious that it's added later, or it's different handwriting, it seems more likely that people were like, well, this is lame. Wait a sec, what about all this other stuff? So they add this condensed version of things that sort of follow. And again, originally, well, not again necessarily, but in addition, these things didn't necessarily all travel together right away, although they started to fairly quickly be kind of a book, like a set of books that travel together. But it wasn't as easy to transport it or make it like we have now. So they just start adding some stuff on there. Of course, this makes people very uneasy because they think, oh, well, the Bible's been changed. No, it hasn't. Dead Sea Scrolls. Did you send me something about that? Or maybe it was just Wes Huff I saw pop up in there, or maybe somebody else. But they're finding, or they are now dating some of the Dead Sea Scrolls even older than originally thought. So it used to be like the Old Testament that everyone had was the Masoretic text from about 1000 AD. And that's not really around the time of all the things that have been written. The Dead Sea Scrolls all of a sudden have enormous amounts of text that predate Christ. Like texts that go back 1,000 years, sometimes more, sometimes less. And the changes there are basically non-existent or insignificant. So like spelling errors and leaving out a word here, leaving out a word there, things like that. So the text of the Bible is pretty consistent. But anyway, that was just because somehow we got into, I opened my big mouth at the front of the commentary. But we are here to talk about Mark 11. And one of the things to keep in mind related to Mark 16:8 and following is that this is weird. Jesus in Mark is a little weird. He's different. He's not framed the same way as he is in other Gospels. They're emphasizing different aspects of Jesus. But in Mark, maybe it's not even so much Jesus as it is what I said earlier, which is that the people are idiots. So they're kind of dummies. They don't get it. But at the same time, you sort of understand because Jesus isn't exactly making sense, or it's only what they heard. It's not necessarily all that he said, or, it's just this different view or angle on Jesus. So then when we look at Mark 11, there's a ton of stuff here.
Yeah, that's why Peter was so confused at times, because if you read Mark and some of these accounts, he was if he was the one dictating to Mark, maybe it's definitely a different viewpoint, and his viewpoint's different than.
Well, we talked about this when we started with the parables, that they aren't meant for you to understand. They're meant to sift through the ones who won't understand or refuse to understand. And this one in particular, there are a lot of people that really won't want to understand, or they will understand and it just makes them furious. So
this is one of those. Jesus was
it's very offensive,
like he did to the Pharisees, right? They'd say something, and he'd say something back, and they'd be so mad.
Well, that's who it's directed at, I think, ultimately.
Yeah.
But for us today, I think it applies because we're the religious leaders of the day. We're the church people, the scribes, Pharisees, Sadducees, elders, and chief priests, and so it is something for us to think about, I think. But it starts out the triumphal entry, the beginning of Mark 11. So that's sort of the context here. People are really excited about Jesus. He's clearly coming in as kind of a king, right? Fulfilling scripture. This is not an accident. He is saying something about himself, and he is letting people sing his praises and wave the palm branches, Hosanna, all that kind of stuff. And then it says he entered Jerusalem, verse 11, went into the temple, and when he looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. On the following day, so this is the curse of the fig tree, when they came from Bethany, he was hungry. And seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see if he could find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard it. And actually the way that this commentary, this theologian here, would, I think, prefer to translate it was, let me see if I can find it. There's a lot here, so I may end up I don't want to do too much flipping on the pages here.
Just reading that first part of verse 12 caught me when you just read it, and it says he was hungry.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's Jesus, the humanity of Jesus. Interesting, right?
But it made me think about the verse about whenever you feed the least of these, you've fed me, because he says, when
I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me something. Yeah.
And he's right here. He says, he was hungry.
Yeah. the humanity of Jesus, getting hungry. Yeah, he felt everything we felt, and his disciples paid close attention is the end of verse 11 in this translation by the author of the commentary here, the Concordia commentary on Mark, the second half of Mark. So they're listening. And, as we talked earlier, I preached about this several weeks ago. At the end of John, it says, Jesus did many other things in the presence of the disciples that are not recorded in this book. These are here so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in him or in his name, I think. So that's got to be there for a reason. He went to Bethany with the 12. They're following him. He does this thing, and then at the very end in verse 14, it says, and his disciples heard it. They were clearly paying attention, which is unique, right? I mean, these guys are generally a bunch of idiots. They keep screwing things up. They're not paying attention. They don't remember what he says. But here, we're making this point. They're paying attention. Okay. And then what follows that? Well, Jesus cleanses the temple. They came to Jerusalem. He entered the temple, began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple, and he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them and saying to them, is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a den of robbers? And the chief priests and the scribes heard it and were seeking a way to destroy him, for they feared him, because all the crowd was astonished at his teaching. And when evening came, they went out of the city. Okay, so comes into Jerusalem, hailed as a king, riding on a donkey. He leaves for Bethany the next day. As they're leaving Bethany, probably heading back to Jerusalem, right? He's hungry. He sees this. He's looking at it. He sees the leaves. He looks for the figs underneath it, and he doesn't see it. He doesn't see anything, and then he curses it. Then he gets to Jerusalem. He enters the temple, and he sees what's going on. He sees this chaos, this mess, and he overturns the tables. He gets all nasty, right? Flipping tables. Who said you couldn't flip? I don't know. That's probably inappropriate. I won't even go there and be a follower.
Only Jesus can do that.
Yes. And the chief priests and scribes, they hear Jesus do all this. They're mad, but it says also that they feared him because everyone is kind of astonished at this. They're all like, wow, he is sticking it to him. We hated how these people oppressed us and did all kinds of things. And man, this is great. As they passed by in the morning, they saw the fig tree withered away to its roots. And Peter remembered, shocking, and said to him, Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered. And then verse 22 and following seems like it just doesn't make any sense to us, I think, if you're not paying close attention to this. And Jesus answered, have faith in God. Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And whenever you stand praying, forgive, if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father also, who is in heaven, may forgive you your trespasses. So, why did you have such interest in this, or what is it that you think most people are taking away from this?
Well, Now, is this similar story also in John? Not exactly.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, somewhere we covered it recently. I thought in the men's Bible study or something. Anyway, so it's just kind of a mystery. I mean, usually you don't see Jesus as usually healing things,
Yeah.
helping things better, and then he comes along this fig tree and he's hungry. He's looking for some figs, even though doesn't it say it's not in season or for figs, or is that?
Yeah, so it is also in...
Is not season it was not the season for figs, right? So anyway, it looks like a healthy tree, but there's no figs. And then he curses it.
Yeah.
And it's like, what does that mean? I mean, I get he's hungry, whatever, and it wasn't anything, but it's just a little fig tree just doing what it thinks it's supposed to do or whatever. Not that it thinks, but doing what a fig tree does, and then it goes into this whole other stuff that we just read through, or you just read through, and then it comes back and says, look, it's withered away. And I don't know, it's just a mystery. And then, so there it was. It just sticks in my head as one of those things that's filed away as, that'd be interesting to really understand what this is trying to say.
Yeah. So, it is not in John, it's in Matthew,
Okay.
I believe, unless it's also in John, and I'm just not seeing it right now.
That's fine.
But it's not framed quite the way this one is. This is actually framed very, very well. I think it's there's a lot here to try and help us understand what's going on, whereas in Matthew it just sort of kind of leaves out some key things. But just to get started here, the incident of the cursing of the fig tree has certainly bedeviled commentators. So it's like the first thing that he says about verses 12 through 14 in this commentary. Several basic difficulties present themselves. If it was not the kairos, or due time, the right time for figs, why did Jesus curse the tree for not having them? The cursing seems to be the only example of Jesus using his power for destructive purposes. That's the second thing. And then the third, if the cursing of the tree is relevant to the discussion of prayer in 11:22 through 24, it seems an oddly negative example to use for positive teaching on the power of prayer. Like, hey, and there's another spot where some of his disciples say to Jesus, like, hey, do you want us to call down fire from heaven? And he's like, no, what are you, idiots? Which would, again, cause confusion.
Would have been really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like God hasn't rained down fire from heaven before. But, I mean, just step back for a second, first of all, and just acknowledge the complexity of Scripture on the one hand, that just reading a couple of words or a sentence or two or a couple of verses is not sufficient to really grasp the full weight of a passage of Scripture. The Bible is far more than that. God is saying so much more than that. And the other part is that, you know what? Jesus, again, is not all sunshine, rainbows, unicorns, lollipops, and cotton candy, right? Like, it's not always fun and exciting. It's not always, hey, let's just love everybody and sing Kumbaya.
And smite the bad guys.
and I mean, in this case, actually, and we talked about this in the previous parable with
he did, I guess, in a way.
There is, yeah.
He does kind of do that. But
and that is, I think, ultimately the message here is the fig trees represent something, and he does it to the fig trees because it is something he is also calling for with something else. And that does actually come to pass. Like in history, what Jesus is essentially getting at here does happen. So there is a destruction, a withering, and it's not pleasant. But then the the talk about prayer is actually more a response to what happens after the implications of what happens when what Jesus predicts come to pass. That's going to change everything. It's going to rock their world. So what then? And Jesus is essentially saying, that's okay. You can still pray and God will hear you. Like, it's not a general, you know what? I really believe that you, Lord, can take Scott and just drop him in a big giant vat of Jell-O. I believe, just cast him out into that. That's not what it's about. Although I do think there is tremendous power in prayer and we should believe and blah, 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 blah. All right, so the context, what happens immediately after this fig tree? He curses the fig tree. He goes to the temple. All right.
Sorry.
It's all right. I was like right at the mic. I was like, whoa. Like a dog whistle almost. Yeah.
Something trying to distract us from them.
So he goes to the temple and he finds this awful stuff. Mm-hmm. And he's pretty ticked off about it. And he essentially curses it. Okay? He's cursing this activity that's happening in there. Now, back to the fig tree for just a second. In that passage, in verse 14, 12 and 13, it keeps saying fig tree, right? Nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs, right? And then his curse is, may no one ever eat fruit from you again. Mm-hmm. Right? And so I think that's, and it's mentioned here in the commentary, that word choice, it's not fig. He chooses this word fruit. That's got a lot of biblical weight to it, right? That there is this demand and desire for God to find fruit from what he has done to bless his people. That there is a fruit that comes from that. And he is saying, look at this fig tree, okay, fig tree in leaf, okay. So he's looking at it and he's seeing things that would indicate that maybe there's already some fruit. In fact, there's a note here in this study Bible I've got. It says, early unripe figs should have been present. It's for around March and April, even though the main harvest season had not yet arrived, August, September. The leaves should have served as a reliable indicator for these early figs. If the early figs do not appear, neither will the later ones. Mm-hmm. So he's looking for something that, even though it's not like prime season, I mean, that's like we get fruit all the time. You got your cherries, right? We got blackberries and blueberries and raspberries. You can get them at any time of the year because of our modern world, right? And the interconnectedness and everything. But sometimes you get them and you go, man, I wish I would have just waited.
Our first two watermelons of the season.
Yeah, exactly. And you go, okay, this is not great. But I'm hungry, so I'm eating them.
Right.
And Jesus is hungry. So he's looking, he sees leaves, and he goes, okay, well, this isn't going to be delicious, but it will be something. So he goes up, he expects to find unripe or not the best, choicest fruit. And even that's not there.
Which I can tell, like on my orange tree at home. Like I can go look at it right now, even though we don't pick them until October, November-ish sometimes, or even December, early December. You'll see little oranges, or right now they're the size of a ping pong ball, some of them. So yeah, if I looked at the leaves and you look in there hard enough, you'll see them. So yeah.
And you could eat it if you had to.
I guess.
If you were starving, like you're like really, really hungry.
I guess if you grabbed a few, you could probably squeeze a little
probably
bit of
could.
juice out of it or something, maybe. I don't know. I've never tried that, but
And who's to say that any of that even really matters?
right. Yeah.
That really this could have just been an object lesson, because he knows where he's going, Jerusalem. He knows what he's going to find. That's why he's on earth in the first place. So here we go. The disciples are going to be wowed once again by this incredible display of his power.
But it also made me think that even though it says it's not time, it is time. Remember he's talking about
his time.
It's his time.
Yeah,
Jesus has said it several times. Not yet my time or whatever. Right now is his time.
It's his time.
So, and he's looking for something from that tree.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and there's a whole section in here that, I'm not going to be able to do any kind of justice to this, but this idea that is actually scriptural, that figs are specifically referenced in, I forget where he said, like maybe Malachi? I think it was maybe Micah. Jesus' experience of hunger for figs may be related to the prophet Micah's lament in Micah 7, 1 through 2, over the conduct of God's people. Woe is me, there is not a cluster to eat, a first ripe fig, which my soul desires. The holy or godly one has perished from the land, and an upright one among men does not exist. Right, so it
doesn't sound like it.
It's a direct pulling forward of prophecy or Old Testament. Like, it's prophecy, yes, but it's also like this keeps happening, right? God's people just don't get it. They are stubborn, stupid, useless, just unbelievably, just the contempt they have for God, the propensity they have to ignore him and to refuse to deliver what he is owed, right? And Jesus is looking for this fig, and Micah has said, I didn't even look this up. When Micah, that's probably the end of the Old Testament period. So this is at least a few hundred years before Jesus is there. And Jesus is Jesus is pre-existent, all that kind of, he's the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, right? So I'm not denying the Trinity. I'm just saying that before Jesus is incarnate in the way that we know in the first century, Micah was saying this about God's people, and here's Jesus embodying it as like a life lesson, not just a metaphor. Like, it is a metaphor, but it's, I'm hungry. Look, leaves. Oh, you disgusting whatever. Like, you don't have any. Holy cow. So, that is a kind of, it gets deeper and deeper as you go into this, but just this idea that we owe God fruit, and I am well aware that a conversation like this can really mess with people, because some people, whenever you're speaking about the Bible or about God, there's always two kinds of people out there. There are the kinds of people that are trying desperately already to bear fruit. They're trying to manifest the types of things, the behaviors and results that God calls for. They're naturally wired that way, or their upbringing or life has the culture has sort of driven them to this perpetual pursuit of fruit, essentially success, money, power, affirmation, whatever, right? People approval, beauty, you name it, right? So we've already got people trying, and they hear me and they hear us have this conversation. They just go, oh, but I'm trying, and is it enough? No, it's not. It's never enough. It's not. And the fruit is not the condition for entrance. It's the result of being planted in the vineyard of God, of Christ. So if you hear this and you're exhausted already and you're trying and you're trying and you're trying, don't hear this the wrong way. Okay? This may not actually be directed at someone like you. We are planted in the vineyard purely by the grace of God. Mm-hmm. And it's when you are planted in the right soil, the fruit actually comes. And actually, I would say you may be, if you're hearing this in a wrong way, and it's a burden to hear this call for fruit from God, then you may not be planted in the right soil. You're planted in a soil that is saying it's all up to you, that you are your own source. You decide for yourself. You are the one who is completely and totally and fully responsible for your destiny. Like it's all up to you, and you better get on. You're in the wrong soil, and frankly, some of the fruit that you're bearing, the burden that it feels when you hear someone say this, or the anxiety, the stress, the anger and frustration that comes out, you're planted in the wrong soil. You can't bear the fruit of the Spirit, let's say, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, if you're planted in self-righteous soil, in soil where you are your own God, you are your own gardener. You can't. There's no joy in trying to be the fruit that God wants. Like it comes from, first, the love of God, bringing you into the family of faith, the people of God, by His grace through faith, completely and totally, and But then the other side of it is the people that are so confident that they are in. I mean, that's really who I think this is directed at, right? The people who make a good show of it, right? They've got those leaves, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. and they wear all the right outfits. I mean, I really had a hard time not seeing so many people within our own denomination and others with the showy stuff, the very high church things, and all the right garments and robes and this and that and the other thing. And I just had a really hard time not seeing that.
And are the very glamorous buildings.
Yes, all that, the fancy buildings that...
we must be doing what is right, because look at the building we have. It's beautiful. It's got its own coffee shop and its own bookstore and it's whatever, I don't know.
And that's not to say that in and of itself those things are bad.
Right.
Right? It's just to say that what those should indicate is that there is fruit underneath.
Right.
Real fruit. In season, out of season, doesn't matter. If it's fruit, it's fruit. It's just the stage of development, mm-hmm. right? It's fruit. And far too often, I would say, there ain't much real fruit under that, because it becomes the most important thing. Because we're humans and you're planted in self-righteous soil, whether you hear this as an attack because you love all that stuff, or because you are on this endless pursuit of fruit and you already feel like you're not enough. Both of those are planted in self-righteous soil. That I am the one who determines my righteousness. I am the one who determines my fate and makes myself worthy for God and the blessings of God. So I love beautiful church architecture.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think it has an important place. In fact, I don't know stop me if I already said this in a podcast or some other time, but we were at a church in New Orleans during Holy Week this past season, Holy Week. And there's a church, St. Paul's Lutheran, and holy cow, the stained glass alone. I mean, it was just a great facility, beautiful outside, inside, clearly well taken care of. A big, big place, like in the heart of the city. And the stained glass windows were beautiful. And they told a story. I think, if I remember correctly, one side was like Old Testament, and the other side was New Testament, and it was like 12 apostles, I think is what it was. I don't know. It was dark. It was Good Friday. And so I didn't get a good look, and you leave in silence. So I didn't stick around and chat up people and all that kind of stuff. I'd like to go back. And then the other side is Old Testament, and you could tell who, and I started quizzing my kids like, oh, who do you think that is? Who do you think that is? Oh, you know who that is? Some of them I didn't know. Some of them I was 100% like, oh, this is Jonah, right? I mean, it's hard to miss Jonah with like a whale and, or fish or whatever it was, a big giant fish. And a couple others. Moses, I think, was a pretty obvious one. But it's a teaching tool, and it communicates even to illiterate people like children. Or adults. Some statistic I saw recently about how many adults in America are illiterate.
Wow.
Like 40% or some ridiculous number. I really had a hard time believing the number. But at the same time, I kind of believe the number. If you've ever seen anybody do these man on the street interviews, you don't know much. School's not doing the greatest for them. But all of that stuff is icing on the cake.
Yeah.
It's the decoration on the meat of the actual treat, right? It's the indicator, should be the indicator of substance underneath, not just that you can say, hey, look at how pretty our church is, or look at how pretty our worship is. You know, the way we do worship and the way our pastor behaves and dresses and what we follow and all that kind of stuff. It is irrelevant if there is not a strong foundation that is bearing fruit. The kind of fruit that God demands. Not the kind of fruit that we want or the kind of fruit that society around us looks at and says, oh, clearly they're doing the right thing because look at how successful they are. No, back to the Spirit. What's an obvious way? I mean, the fruit, singular, of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. All of that. That's the fruit. And sadly, really none of us are fully bearing that this side of eternity. But, man, there are some people that are really not bearing. I don't know if they're preparing for Sunday in the Trinity, right? It's Trinity Sunday. That's why I'm saying it. And there are mutually exclusive things that are both true at the same time. Jesus is man. He gets hungry. He gets angry. He gets tired. He gets thirsty. All this stuff. And yet he is also God in the flesh. How are both of those things true at the same time? I don't know. How is this both true at the same time, that we are never really, truly, fully bearing that fruit, and yet it's usually pretty obvious when people are not?
Right. Well, I think there are some churches that are bearing fruit. Church bodies, maybe, not any, it's the whole body. It's not necessarily one person. Maybe there are some people in there that lead the way, right? That get the rest of us in there going and doing that. But yeah, and it just seemed, when Jesus comes looking, that's when you can't just go graft one on real quick.
Yeah, there's no like,
quick, let's grab this one, we'll hang him on the tree.
company's coming, like fluff the pillows and throw some stuff into a closet, and like I mean, there's parables about that. Matthew 25, the 10 virgins, right? The lamps. Same thing with the parable of the talents. Same thing with the sheep and the goats, that parable as well. That whole chapter, Matthew 25, when the Son of Man comes, like, he's coming and you're going to be caught off guard and shocked. And so it's, yeah.
Well, then immediately he goes to the church or to the synagogue,
he goes
right?
to the temple.
And then he tears it apart. So it's almost like he was like symbolically looking for the fruit, or actually looking for the fruit. And he is hungry. He's hungry probably in his physical stomach, but he's also hungry for his church to bear fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he sees that the tree isn't doing fig tree is doing what it's not supposed to do, he curses it, and then he goes to the church, the temple, and it's apparently not doing what it's supposed to be doing either. So
he basically curses it.
Yeah.
Like, he is cursing the temple. That's what he's doing. And he's overturning the tables. And so what exactly is the fruit here that he's talking about? My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. So I think there was a note in here. Maybe not. Maybe it's in the commentary. That's going to be harder to sift through. Where they are set up is occupying space in likely what would have been the court of the Gentiles. So here are these people that are not Jews, not part of, the descendants of Abraham, children of Abraham. And yet God has made a place for them to draw near. They can't draw near or as near as the children of Abraham, but there is a place for them. And yet they're being boxed out.
They filled it all up with something else.
And for the sake of what? Profit. Right? And then, I think maybe it was the Chosen. Maybe I think it was actually a different video, a different movie maybe, but based off of biblical events. And maybe it was like a Christmas one or an Easter one. I don't know. But there's this scene where there's a guy who brings his lamb, his sacrifice, to be inspected. So is this appropriate for my sacrifice? And it looks pretty darn good. But, they always seem to find a way to say, no, you have to buy ours. Right? I mean, that's turning access to God into this,
hurdle.
Yeah. I think the way that they talk about in the commentary is this emphasis of tradition over the truth, right? Like supplanting what God's intent was with what he gave, and noticing how people have this way of absolutely corrupting it, ruining it in every sense, every way imaginable. They take it and warp it and disgrace it. And, I think that's what's probably upsetting Jesus.
Right.
At least a piece of it, a way to understand it. Now, what he's talking about, what he's saying here, when he talks about, but you have made it a den of robbers, he's actually referencing Jeremiah. Jeremiah, I believe, is chapter 7. Let's see if I can find a cave of robbers, it says in Jeremiah. In Jeremiah's time, the people of God did all sorts of wicked deeds, and for Jesus, a like situation obtains. The people do not obey God's law, but substitute human traditions. And he references Mark 7 there, where, Jesus, I believe he makes all foods clean and the washing and all this kind of stuff is talked about there. While their teachers are proud and self-aggrandizing, do not have regard for the poor and helpless, and have the pretense of religiosity. Furthermore, and more seriously, in the case of Jesus himself, the people, and especially the leadership, do not receive him, since they do not repent at his coming, the coming of God's eschatological reign and rule, but say that he is in league with Satan. And as they do not acknowledge him as their God, who does the eschatological works of Yahweh himself in healing the blind and deaf, who raises the dead, who shepherds his people, and who even forgives sin, as only God can do. Indeed, they seek to kill him, the ultimate rebellion against their God, and the ultimate transgression of the first commandment of the Torah. Pretty harsh words. And then Jeremiah, it says 11, has this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your eyes? Behold, I myself have seen it, declares the Lord. And he goes into this whole big thing. And now because you do all these things, says Yahweh, I will do to the house on which my name is called, in which you trust, the place that I gave to you and to your fathers, just as I did at Shiloh. And what he did to Shiloh was destroy it utterly. By using Jeremiah 7:11 in the temple, Jesus brings this threat prediction into play as well. The temple will be like Shiloh, i.e. desolate, which in fact occurs historically in AD 70 under the hand of the Roman general Titus. Indeed, the threat prediction of the context following Jeremiah 7:11 is a verbal parallel confirmation of the curse placed upon the unfruitful fig tree. And then the just keeps going. Jeremiah 26, where Jeremiah is actually delivering this message. The understanding presented here is confirmed, as it were, by an incident later in the book of Jeremiah, in which the prophet stands in the house of the Lord and says, at God's command, Jeremiah 26:2, that if the people do not obey the words of the Lord and the words of the prophet, God will make his house like Shiloh. Note that afterward the leaders tell Jeremiah that he will die, and later say that he deserves the penalty of death because of his prophecy against their city. In response, Jeremiah declares that he is speaking for God and that they should mend their ways. But he also announces that if they put him to death, they will all be guilty of shedding an innocent man's blood. Jeremiah 26:15. The parallels to Jesus and developments relative to him are only too apparent. Here it all begins. So Jesus is pretty ticked off. But we haven't even gotten to the prayer part yet, have we?
No.
Thoughts so far? We're, holy cow, yeah, we blew past the normal mark, yeah.
Yeah.
We could make everybody tune in next time, but I think this is set up pretty well.
Yeah, I think it's the prayer part is like I guess what I got out of it was the tree was withered to its roots, but it's not like I don't know. This is and then he goes into the prayers, right? So you still have your connection with God, even though that temple there has been.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Jesus, they're looking at this fig tree withered, and they may have actually understood the Micah 7, certainly after they went to Jerusalem and Jesus flipped off the leaders, metaphorically. I'm not suggesting that Jesus...
He did flip over some tables, so
yeah.
He did some flipping.
Oh, yeah, definitely. They're seeing this, and look, the fig tree that you cursed is withered to its roots, right? I mean, like all the way, completely cut off dead. Jesus says, have faith in God. Or actually, one way of translating those same words in the commentary here is, you have faith in God. So like a declarative statement. Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, which mountain? This one. Which one? The one the temple's on. And throughout Scripture, Jerusalem and the temple and the mountain are all often, one stands for the other kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. The center of, There's even, legends or ties to that mountain even being the mountain where Eden was.
Maybe.
Maybe. Yeah, the beginning of creation. Yeah, so anyway.
But if anyone says to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father also who is in heaven may forgive you your trespasses.
That's basically like the Lord's Prayer right there, huh?
Yes, exactly. It is. And so he's saying that your ability to approach God in these key ways for these key things is not in jeopardy. To this mountain, clearly not just a random mountain. Does not doubt, but in accordance with standard Koine Greek usage, it means does not dispute in his heart, right? So this is already, so disputing it, meaning like, no. We need the temple. Right? That which he declares, the subject of the verb is not the person who commands this mountain, but God who speaks declarations concerning the temple.
And it also seems prophetic, right?
Mm-hmm. He who says to this mountain, not whoever, but he who says to this mountain, is probably a better way. That's kind of what they're saying in this last piece that I just read. But God who speaks declarations concerning the temple, right? So it's okay. The temple's going away. And what will result after that, there will still be access to God. One trusts in God, but concerning what does one trust God? Given what has been said above, what one trusts is what God has said through the prophets and through Jesus' words and actions concerning the temple. So you believe what he is saying. Specifically, this is the word that the temple will be destroyed, but also that God keeps his promises. And we could spend another episode just going into the connection between Solomon's prayer in 1 Kings 8 and what's happening here. Okay. And maybe we should. I don't know. This was enlightening for me. I don't know how I never got into this, right? Here's the bottom line, though. We conclude with two further points. We have said that Jesus, through the details of his teaching, especially in 11:24-25, forges a strong connection to the dedication of the temple by Solomon, 1 Kings 8, especially the latter's dedicatory prayer. We may now say very explicitly that Jesus' teaching here is also and especially an assurance to his followers of several important things. God is still in his heaven, just because the temple's gone. And how appropriate for people in places where churches have been destroyed from war, from natural disasters, age, basically failing to maybe do what God has commanded. And just over time, the church withers to nothing. There's nobody there to take care of it, and it just passes off and
or even the tradition of where I think Muslims do it too, where you have to go visit that particular the what do they call that? Pay homage to the different locations, right?
There's a phrase for it.
Yeah, there's a phrase for it. Losing it, but yeah. So You don't have, and then, yeah, and they talked about that when he talked to that one woman at the well, right? Spirit and truth. It's not going to be this mountain or that mountain or whatever. So, yeah.
Yep. Your world is about to be rocked, but it's okay because what you thought was your world was not your world. Jesus is your world. God still hears his people's prayer. That's what's happening here. Like, it's in this assurance that, hey, yeah, this thing that you thought this is where you talk to God and the only place that you could connect with God, that's going away.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be a real painful, miserable experience. That's okay. Nothing's changed. God, in fact, everything's changed and it's better. And God still forgives sins, right? Because that's at the heart of what took place in the temple. The sacrifices, right? Even though all that stuff got abused by people who could profit off of it, they were still there for the forgiveness of sins and the righteousness of God's chosen shepherds didn't change the efficacy or the reality of what he was trying to do or helping his people to do through that whole thing, or pointing people to really the ultimate Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, right? Sins were forgiven through all of that on account of what would happen in Christ. Hey guys, don't worry, sins are still forgiven. In fact, you are now empowered and called to forgive the sins of your neighbor. Like, not necessarily go to a temple for your own sins, but actually as you stand praying wherever you are, asking the Lord to forgive you, you better forgive others. And in accordance to that, not how spotless and blemishless your animal is, but that you come and say, Lord, forgive my sins. Let me forgive these sins of others. I don't hold them against them. So it's just like really blew my mind. Connection to the Lord's Prayer, like you said, is talked about at length in the commentary here. So, holy cow.
There's a lot to that.
Yeah.
It's like infinite almost.
I love a good commentary, and that's why I hate most commentaries, because most of them are terrible. They just don't make much sense. They're not overly practical. They're not written in ways that are English to people that aren't nerds about it. And I'm kind of a nerd compared to your average person as far as this stuff goes. Maybe
Right.
not as much as others, but there's a lot there, and making the word accessible is great stuff. So hopefully this made sense to somebody. I didn't botch it up in the
Made sense to me.
transmission.
Made more sense to me. I don't have to think about that one as much as I. It's not filed away as one of those mysteries anymore. I mean, there's more to it that we didn't maybe dig into, but definitely on a higher level, it makes sense, which is good.
Yeah. Well, feel free to take home the commentary and have at it if you're interested.
Okay.
You just can't ask me any questions on anything from Mark 8:27 through 16:20.
No,
Because
it's not in there.
Well, no, I'll need it, and if you have it, then I can't use it.
Okay.
So, well, yeah. And then in the future, if you've exhausted it, then I don't have to answer any of those questions anymore.
On a podcast, right?
Yeah, but you could. We'll let you say, okay, here's your homework,
Mm.
and have you come in and report back. Maybe that's how this should work.
Oh man, getting homework now. At least I don't have to write a paper on the spot or
maybe you should write a paper about it. That's actually something I did to my kids. I don't know, maybe a year ago now. I don't even know how long it's been, but I just struggling to just sit down and read the Bible and pray together. And they're not paying attention. They're not engaging. They're not even like paying attention the slightest bit. They're not asking any questions, or at least I didn't feel they were paying attention. They certainly weren't engaging with me in any kind of conversation, talking, laughing, joking, all this kind of nonsense. And I said, okay, fine. We won't do this anymore. But every week, by the end of the week, you will have a paper, and I divided up the entire Bible.
Oh my gosh.
And said this many chapters a week. So for the older ones, more chapters because they have less time to graduation. It's so terrible. I'm so mean. But actually, I feel like it's worked out, and anyway. But I can do that for you too if you'd like.
I like the way this one popped up. Just kind of random. It was in my, like I said, on my shelf of things I didn't understand, and I know I'd been in groups and we've discussed it, and nobody seemed to really get it all. It was almost like they broke it all into pieces. You know what I mean? It was like they talked about what was that whole thing with it's like the whole thing about the tree, the fig tree was in this, and then it mentions it later, but none of that was related to each other. The whole thing about the prayer part about the mountain, whatever. They just look at it as, oh, now I can pray and I can hurl things into the sea or something. You know what I mean? It's like, what is all? It didn't relate. So let me just say that.
Yeah. Well,
but now that it's all tied together, it makes so much more sense.
Well, and here's an interesting connection that I think I thought of. I don't think I saw it in the commentary at all. I think I actually thought of it as we were talking maybe before in the green room or whatever the heck you want to call it.
Before that room in there, at least the closet maybe.
Well, even here, I mean, green room, people refer to that like, oh, we're just not streaming yet or recording yet.
Okay.
Like you're in the Zoom, different faces, all that on these YouTube podcasts or whatever that people do. But no, this idea that fig leaves are insufficient. You know what that?
Back to creation.
There you go. The fig leaves.
Not a sufficient covering.
Mm-hmm. And so the leaves that Jesus sees, anticipating figs or fruit underneath, those are our ways of covering up our nakedness, our shame. We have things that we try to use as ways that communicate, hey, we're good. Mm-hmm. We're valuable, we're worthy, we're all these things. And sometimes, it's like big giant truck, big giant whatever, like big giant house, big giant whatever, like compensating much, right? Like people have that, the loudest man in the room is compensating for something. The most aggressive is compensating for something. Like there's this way that people joke. But the truth is that we are all, in a way, compensating for an inner emptiness and inner insecurity that we aren't enough, that we aren't great and good and all that kind of stuff. And so we can get obsessed with the window dressing. Mm-hmm. We can get obsessed with building I know pastors, okay? A lot of really, really good guys, but man, it's so weird being among pastors sometimes because they are all like, it's like, wait a sec, don't you guys get it? Like Jesus, remember? And then I even find myself kind of getting sort of subconsciously roped into it. So that I'm not trying to cast aspersions on them. They're human. And when you put us all together sometimes, it's just this weird cocktail, But those are all fig leaves, not figs.
Right.
The substance, the fruit underneath is what matters far more than what everyone else is seeing. Those are all just like little fig leaves that God in the garden took away and replaced with something that was far more appropriate. And that was through a sacrifice, through
Right.
death of these animals, covered by these animals, and that's Jesus. Jesus is our covering. Jesus is far more than fig leaves. Jesus is that's the soil that you plant in, the grace and mercy and love and compassion of Jesus, and that's where we get the fruit. House of Prayer for All Nations, reaching people that, just because they don't fawn over our stained glass or our big fancy building, or
We do have some nice stained glass here, too.
we do. Yeah, not knocking it at all.
Yeah.
So, all right,
Very
anyway,
good.
I just thought that was a nice little addendum on the end.
No, yeah, that was good.
All right, well, now
Maybe I'll dig into it some more on my own thoughts and see if I can can guess the book.
stump the pastor again. Yeah. Well, get working on it.
All right.
Figure out your next tricky question here. But until then, y'all, smash something. Buy a book. Nobody's Nola, Nola's Icelandic Adventure, which, by the way, is selling really well in, I forget the name of the bookshop. It's the Brothers Old Bookshop or something like that. Old bookstore
Give him a shout out.
in Reykjavik. We gave him 10 copies a few weeks ago. He's down. He's only got 3 left. He says it's selling well. Send more.
Nice.
So we got to get some more to him somehow.
Send him the link to your podcast so that you can. You have to give them a shout out on your podcast and then share them the link so that the people will listen to it and hear that.
Yep. And if you are concerned with the fruit that God is concerned with, the nations, right? Bringing all people to faith in Jesus, that is done only by him and through the Holy Spirit, but it is also done through us, right? How do these two mutually exclusive things exist? They just do, just like Jesus is God and man. And here's some really, really helpful stuff that my friend Bruce and I put together in a book for you, Open Arms, Connecting People to Jesus. And before I find another reason to keep talking, taste and see that the Lord is good. Ice cream is sweet, but Jesus is far sweeter.